And I want to invite our esteemed guests up on the stage. Eric Heins, President of California Teachers Association, representing over 200,000 teachers in the state of California. Barbara Mandeloni, President of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, Massachusetts. So we're going to begin this conversation with just by giving them each a chance to sort of say what's on their minds and talk a little bit about the challenges facing their organizations and our profession and public education.
So good afternoon, almost evening. Very glad for the opportunity to talk to you all. I just want to start off by saying that sitting up here and talking to you is a contradiction of everything I'm about to talk about. And I'm really deeply struggling with that. Because what I'm going to talk about is power, and I'm going to talk about why it matters that we understand that the power is not in the State House, and it's not in the White House, it's not up there, but the power is here with us, looking at each other, talking to each other, developing analysis of what's going on, developing a plan for how to address that, and acting collectively to change things. That's what the power is. So it is. I just want to note the contradiction that I am sitting talking to you within a context that would denote that the power is somehow in leadership rather than in the people. And I'm being too polite because what I was going to do, and I haven't told Anthony this, was actually just have you all talk to each other. And then I thought, well, that might piss some people off. So let's maybe save some time to do that at the end, if we can. I have a 5-minute thing I'd like to have you do at the end, because I think it's important that we experience our power and the power that we bring to each other, and that we not just talk about it. So I'm going to ask for 5 minutes at the end to do that. So I just want to say, thinking about power, thinking about analysis, and thinking about vision. In Massachusetts last year, most of you have probably heard some, and I know some of this has been talked about in some of the workshops. We beat a $30 million campaign to and what I want to tell you about that campaign is just a couple of things I can say right now. First of all, the campaign grew out of a coalition, the Massachusetts Education Justice Alliance, which was a coalition of labor, community, and parent and student groups that had been meeting before the charter people came after us to fight back about charter schools and high stakes testing. The reason it matters that it was a coalition is that when the charter people came after us, and they came after us in a 3-pronged attack. They said we're going to file a lawsuit that says it's a civil rights issue, that students don't have access to high-quality schools, charter schools. They came after us and said we're going to spend $18 million on a ballot question, and then they attempted to squeeze us to accept legislation that would be a compromise. And we said no. And when we said no, it wasn't just Barbara Mandeloni, President of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, that said no. But we went in as a coalition and sat with the Senate President who wanted us to cut a deal. And we had the President of the AFL-CIO Massachusetts at the table. We had the President of the Northeast NAACP at the table. We had students from Boston at the table. We had parents from Boston at the table. We had Boston Teachers Union at the table, and we had AFT Massachusetts at the table. And that was a powerful statement that he wasn't just sitting there with Barbara, who we would believe, maybe, because that's the way things operate, right? Is union leadership goes in and cuts a deal, and then comes back and explains to the membership why it's a good thing. This was something that we said, no, we're not going to do it, but we said no together. That understanding of power is absolutely essential to the movement that we want to build. Absolutely essential. The other thing that's essential this isn't some aberration, guys. This isn't like, oh damn, the rich people suddenly decided that they wanted to figure out how to get richer, and they only figured that out in the last 30 years, right? This is capitalism. This is the way it's supposed to work. It's doing exactly what it is designed to do, which is exploit workers, support white supremacy, and undermine the public good, right? That's what it's doing, and I think it's really important to have that in our analysis so that when we're trying to figure out our strategy, we realize that whatever we do, they're coming back for more, and we have to understand the structural forces that we're fighting. We're not just fighting the Koch brothers, we're fighting every Koch brother that's ever been. That's what we're fighting. And it's important for us to understand that. And then the last thing I want to talk about is vision. Because the sick beauty of Donald Trump is that he's wiped the table clear. The world's crazy and upside down. And we have an opportunity to right that table. But when we right that table, let's right it the right way. Let's actually plant a flag for what we really want, for the world we really want, for an end to poverty, for a dismantling of white supremacy, for public schools for every child, for free health care. Like, we shouldn't be let's turn the table over a little bit and get it back maybe to where it's not so bad. This is our time. Last thing I want to say, and then I'll give it to Eric, and then you can just ask Eric questions. We say a lot, when we fight, we win. And it can be, I say it a lot, and sometimes when I say it, like at the end of a rally, I'm like, when we fight, we win. And I'm sure people are like, no, sometimes we lose, Barbara, what are you talking about? But here's why when we fight, we win means, what it means. When we do the work that I'm talking about, which is talk to each other, develop an analysis, understand the problem, and act collectively to fight to make the world better, we not just change the world, but we change how we experience ourselves in the world. And a lot of the conversations that I've been having today have been about people who are trying to figure out how to talk to charter parents about their sort of individual choice within the capitalist neoliberal context to choose charter schools. And what I think has happened is this hyper-capitalism that we live in right now forces people into a sense of themselves as individuals. To get academic, it's our neoliberal subjectivity. And we find ourselves understanding ourselves in relationship to the market and as individuals in competition. When we join collectively in action to fight for a better world, we change how we know ourselves. And we change how we know each other. And that's really powerful. That's why everybody's smiling in those pictures when they're getting arrested. Because they're like, oh my God, I found myself in the world as a different kind of human being than I thought I was allowed to be. So that's the key to when we fight, we win. There.
So thank you, Barbara. Thank you for that. That actually ties in very well with what I was going to say. First of all, welcome to California and to the northern part of the state. And to those of you, first of all, let me apologize for the air quality. But just remember that while we're doing all of this work in here, that we keep in mind our brothers and sisters who are, the air quality is nothing compared to some of what they're going through and the displacement and all the fires just north of here and down in Los Angeles and up and down the state just due to the dry and hot conditions. And so just keep in mind many of them educators and families who are being displaced, and it's going to take a while for them to get back into the groove of things, and so we're going to have our hands full with that. So that in mind, I just want to start by first of all doing a little bit, I want you to repeat after me. It's all about relationships. when we talk about power, when we talk about just about anything, it's all about relationships. Here in California, we are, we're big, and I see a lot of my CTA family out here, and it's exciting to see you here, so welcome. But here in California, it's the best of worlds and the worst of worlds. We've done some pretty exciting things here, I think, politically, with how we are funding our schools. We've moved all our money away from a one-size-fits-all approach at the state level to making all the money go down to the local level to be decided by local districts. But more importantly, the accountability plans that are being built and how that money is being spent requires the district to work together with the teachers and the community to build that, not just to build a plan and then have them sign off, but actually build it together. And more importantly, it shifted $10.8 billion to schools that need it the most, that teach students who are English language learners, that teach students who are low socioeconomic status and in foster care. And so that was actually a big shift and almost a redistribution of wealth. Now, that's being said, we're still 46th in the nation in how much we per pupil what we spend on our schools. But in addition to that, we also have the largest number of students in unregulated corporate-run charters than anywhere else in the country. In Los Angeles, about 151,000 students are in unregulated charters. There's twice as many as I believe are in New York City, and it's absolutely insane. So we've been working very hard to kind of work in this environment. The Charter Schools Association, and thank you, Citizens United, is spending like crazy in the elections in the last election cycle for about 8 different assembly seats. They spent over $27 million. In Los Angeles, to buy 2 LAUSD school board seats, they spent over $13 million. This is the craziness we are living in here in California, and it's almost an echo of what's happening in DC, which is so awash with money it's almost immoral. And so I want to echo again, where does our power lie? What Barbara said, it's all about relationships, and that's how we're going to fight, and that's how we're going to continue to push back. And I don't want to take a lot of time from Anthony, because I know he has some very specific questions around those kinds of things, and I could go for a long time talking, because I'm very excited about what we're doing here in California around education for students. I'm a teacher in Pittsburgh, California. That's the one without the H. It's about 35 miles east of here, and so you're kind of in my home turf. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Just to start us off, you mentioned the Charter Schools Association, and if each of you could just talk a little bit about how you see charter schools, and do you see them as public schools? And what are some of the pros and cons of organizing teachers in charter schools?
Well, here in California, we're actively organizing charter schools, good or bad, whether that we believe we have members who started charter schools who are actually adhering to what the original union concept, the Shanker concept of what charter schools were all about, creating laboratory schools. They're part of their local unions. They are creating laboratory schools that they can then spread whatever they discover, through the rest of the districts and things like that. That being said, most of the schools and the charters are run by these corporate charter management organizations. Some of them are for-profit on the outside, and some of them are kind of for-profit hidden. And you know how they do that? They play that game. They create a shell nonprofit, and then they lease property back from themselves, or they give food contracts to companies that they have, or they just completely just start pay their CEOs these outrageous salaries. And they can do that because the how that money is spent is completely opaque. There's no transparency in the charter school industry at all. We believe very strongly that charter school teachers should be organized, because that's how whether they work in a good school or a bad school, they should have a collective voice and to be able to advocate for what they need in those schools. One big example is the CAVA, which is the K-12 virtual charters in it's a national for-profit chain. In California, we just organized about 600 teachers at their request because of what the K-12 was doing to the California virtual academies. Now, you may not like virtual academies. NEA has a position that talks a lot about virtual academies. Can't really provide, just by their nature of being all virtual, can't provide a good education. But we believe these teachers had a right to organize. At the same time, the Attorney General in California, Kamala Harris, who's now our senator and hopefully a candidate for president, I'm just saying, sued K-12 for the misappropriation of money and taking the money that should have gone to the students and the teachers and sending it back to the shareholders on the East Coast, and $1.8 million, wanted $1.8 million, $1.8 million against K-12. And then just recently, an audit found that K-12 and the Kava schools hold the state back $2 million for over-reporting ADA and all these kinds of things. And that, at the same time, the Kava teachers have been organizing for their first contract so they can begin to fight back on some of these things and get some protection, so as these abuses happen, that they can fight back and not lose their job doing that. And we think they have an absolute right to do that. And there are many examples of that in some more traditional charters. I can go on about the abuses. You probably know them as well as I do. But that's the first part. And we're also focusing on, we have a website called the kidsnotprofits.com. You might want to check it out. It's focusing on where and exposes where the money comes from for many of these charter management organizations. It started off just as a CTA thing. We are now expanding that in a coalition with many other partners who are also concerned about how this money is being spent. We're sponsoring legislation to bring some more transparency to how that money is spent and some accountability to that money, because it's all taxpayer money, and also some open meetings, so they can actually have some open meetings, acts, and all of that. And we were actually successful because we worked along with the NAACP and other organizations in getting a bill passed and signed by the governor that no longer allows charter schools to discriminate against students for any reason, and that was just signed by the governor this year.
So this is an interesting question in terms of our charter schools, public schools. The short answer is no. And in Massachusetts, during the No on 2 campaign, it's written into our statute that they're called public charter schools. And I just refuse to accept that. I mean, the idea that public money is given to private interest doesn't make it public. What makes something public is that the public actually owns it, that there's democratic control, that there's transparency. And I think it's really dangerous, and the NEA has slipped into this, the National Education Association, in allowing the word of public to be put in front of charter schools and be used that way. The danger of charter schools is a deep danger. It's not just about the funding, although the funding is a huge problem. It's not just about excluding students and pushing students out. It's not just about resegregation. It's about undermining the very concept of public education as something that we all come to together. And it's an ideal, and it's an ideal we have not met, but it's a critical ideal to hold to if we're going to be able to sustain and protect our democracy. So I really absolutely reject, and just because the legislator says it doesn't make it true, that's why we fight to win and change things. In terms of organizing charter schools, I think all workers should be organized. I mean, the other intro that I didn't give, that's in here somewhere, talks about why I'm a labor leader and why I really believe that the movement that we need to build to create the world that we want needs to be a labor movement. The labor movement absolutely needs to be central to that. And when we have had successes, sometimes it's taken the labor movement to figure it out a while, but often the labor movement has led. Gary can give us a review of that later. Workers' rights absolutely have to be essential to the movement. If we are not protected, if we don't have democratic workspaces, we don't have democracy. If the people in power could choose, and they are choosing right now with the Janus case, as they're attempting to go after public sector unions, between allowing us to vote and allowing us to control our workspaces, they'll give us the damn vote. But what is your life if you can't control your workspace? So absolutely, I think we need to organize all workers. In Massachusetts, we haven't done that in the MTA, and primarily because my interest right now is organizing, my internal organizing, and not doing external organizing. We need to build internally, we need to be strong internally, and then we can extend our resources beyond that.
Thank you. I want to shift our focus a little bit to sort of statewide politics. We've got a gubernatorial election coming up, and you know, we had a process a couple of years ago with the presidential election endorsement process, and so I'm just wondering if each of you could talk about the process that you use, that your organizations use to determine what candidates we will endorse as organizations, and what role the rank and file members have in having their voices heard on that decision.
Well, I would say, I'll look at some of our members here, that we have a process, but I don't know that process, I don't believe that process is as deeply democratic as it should be. I think that the MTA right now has a divided membership in terms of how much the membership thinks we need to choose the best worst candidate, or the least worst, whatever. You know what I mean. And how much we should stand down and not endorse candidates who will not fully support us. Leading up to the presidential election, we held forums across the state to try to get a sense of that from people. Say, like, let's at least have talked about it. And at the, you know, we don't, the national endorses, we don't endorse for presidential candidate. Within Massachusetts, you know, there's Deval Patrick, who was the governor before Charlie Baker. Like, he was booed at the MTA annual meeting. What was it? What year is that? Like 2013? I'm looking at Mary. Help me remember. Because he, as a Democrat, like lots of Democrats, was critical to imposing the corporate reform model on our public schools. And the membership knew that. So that divide, I think, is more and more clear. In Massachusetts right now, Governor Charlie Baker helped us win the charter campaign because he was such a staunch supporter of it. And when he appeared in a commercial with his $4,000 lounge chair in the background, explaining how this charter cap was going to work for the black and brown children of Boston, it kind of didn't work, and it didn't work in Boston. So it's going to be interesting for us, as you know, we have a process, a candidate review committee, but I think we need to democratize that process so that we can really figure out what we want to do. And I think it's going to be a challenge for us, quite honestly. Governor Baker's an easy bad guy. He's a bad guy. I mean, we're doing, talk about campaigns. We have a campaign for the public good. We're working with labor, community, organizations, and we are building our own network of who are the power brokers in Massachusetts, and how are they connected to the governor, and where are they privatizing mass transit and health and housing. You know, what are they doing there? So he's easily a target. Whether or not there's going to be a Democratic candidate who's worth fighting for is a serious question. And I'm not sure right now how we're going to answer it. It's a long, I don't know.
We're always engaged in that conversation about whether to endorse. We're actually in the process of endorsing now because for our constitutional officers, which are the governor, lieutenant governor, AG, the treasurer and controller, and some of the board of equalization and all of that, we have a process. You know, we're CTAs, we're big, so we're all about process. We have a state council of education, which is about almost 800 teachers that are elected by their local areas to represent them, and they're the ones that end up making the decision. They're meeting actually next week in Los Angeles 4 times a year. They'd make all the endorsement recommendations, and ultimately we participate in these elections because if we don't, there is so much money and other influence out there, and we know the Republicans in California have been pretty much shunted out of the process here, and so for us it's really dem on dem violence, and it's the corporate Democrats, and we've seen this, you know, we see this battle going on in the California Democratic Party, and we see it, you know, a reflection of what's been happening in the national scene, and the board, my board just met last week and made a recommendation to our state council. Like I say, this meeting next week. The reason we're doing that, particularly important for us in California, the governor is a very strong. I don't think people realize how much influence the governor actually has, even more than the legislature in many different ways. But as importantly is also the superintendent of public instruction. Where there are 2 candidates currently running, and we think that with we have a top 2 primary, that the race could be over in June. So we've kind of moved up our process a lot. One of the persons running in that race is Marshall Tuck, who ran against, and he's very easy to boo, and I would do that too. As soon as council finishes not endorsing him, I hope. Don't quote me on that one, by the way. But he used to be the CEO of Green Dot Charter Schools, and which puts us in a country because we also have organized Green Dot Charter Schools as well, so they're a union shop. But we also know what his real agenda is, and we're not fooled by that. We have a great candidate that we're recommending, Tony Thurman, who's actually from the north of here, from the Richmond area, and we'll be bringing that recommendation to council. We also have like I said, in the governor's election, we also have a candidate, another one who's also very corporate Democrat run. And recently we realized what this kind of means. We had a bill in the legislature being pushed by the Senate pro tem to create a state-sponsored charter school, or a state-sponsored school. Now, this would create the first state-sponsored school that is not for the deaf and the blind that in existence, and would take a school that one of our local billionaires in Los Angeles, Eli Broad, wanted this STEM school and thought he could pass it through the legislature and just get it sponsored. And it was a coalition of labor and a coalition of our partners that put the stop to this and actually killed it in the Senate because of that power, because it's all about. And it was the relationships that we're beginning to build, because as big and bad as we can be, you know, we're not big enough in this struggle, because it's a titanic struggle, and it's going to take every single one of us to work together to really push back on this. And there are no perfect candidates. I mean, you could find probably any candidate, and I could, you know, and we can talk about them overall. But not engaging for us is not really an option, because of that. We need to build the relationships with them as well.
I just want to add a couple of things. Listening to Eric, one of the reasons that Charlie Baker is the governor of Massachusetts is that the Democrats had put forward a candidate who about 6-7 weeks out, which wasn't a very strong candidate anyway to begin with, made disparaging remarks about Massachusetts public schools relative to charter schools. And, you know, talk about relationships. I'm like driving, I'm like, no, you don't understand how pissed off my members are about this. You're going to take this back right away. I mean, it was crazy. Now, she lost by only about 14,000 votes. And I'll tell you, I hope my members didn't vote for her, because we can't be supporting candidates who think that they can say things like that and then expect the 110,000 members of the Massachusetts Teachers Association to vote for them. We got where we are because we kept voting for people like that. You know, what I say about Betsy DeVos is the Democrats walked us. They walked us to the abyss. That is Betsy DeVos, right? And now they're all like, oh no, we didn't mean vouchers. We just meant charter schools. We didn't mean vouchers. Like that, that's nonsense. We got to call them on that. And like I said, we got to plant a flag for what we really want and make them come and stand with us. And stop thinking that we have to do their bidding. Build a movement. Build a movement, and then, I'm sorry, I just got to say this. Because, when I was elected president of the MTA, everybody thought it was just nonsense. And they thought everything that I said was nonsense. I was an insurgent candidate. I wasn't supposed to win. I came out of nowhere. And the people in the State House were like, who's she? She's going to lose. She was told, everybody, the whisper campaign was, she's here for 2 years. She's gone. I didn't care. I didn't want to go to the State House anyway. We won the charter question. And let me tell you, they look at me differently. And I don't care particularly, but they're like, oh, that's power. They wanted me to think I had personal power. I wanted them to know I had movement power.
Yeah. Well, speaking of what candidates say, Gavin Newsom recently said he's, quote, not interested in the stale debate over whether you are for or against teachers, whether CTA is wrong or Eli Broad is right about the growth of charter schools. So I think people are very concerned about what we're going to encounter should we land with him as the Democratic candidate. So I'd appreciate it if Eric, you could talk a little bit about the considerations that you're considering in the current process.
Yeah, out of the mouth of Gavin. Nobody hung their head more when he said that. It was really, we actually went and talked to him afterwards about what he meant and what he actually intended to say when he said that, and what we think he should mean. But what he said, and he clarified it later. Actually, he spoke at a K-12 water cooler, we call a water cooler conference, and what he meant was that we were having the wrong debate. If the debate was about CTA versus Eli Broad, that was the wrong debate to have about schools. And the really debate to have around schools was about improving schools for all that all students deserve. And that was what he said it very badly. We know his where he stands on our issues. I've had one-on-one conversations with him, many of them. Education is not his first topic, clearly, but it's that's. There's a tape of him, by the way, on the K-12 website about that kind of clarifies a little bit better what his intent was. Now I know that's not what came out, and it's we'll see how that plays out.
We will, and of course he has one-on-one conversations with people like Eli Broad as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So he can tell both of us what we want to hear, and then that's where we end up. Without a lot.
And then the important part is holding him accountable to those words. I mean, that's
words?
It's the words he tells you. I mean, it's the words he told us, and the ones he told our members in the interviews, and the words he says out on the stuff. Those are on his campaign trail. Those are the things we have to hold him accountable for, and those are the things that what the movement and what labor has to hold him accountable for, and make sure that he does hang on to those types of things. And
okay, all right, thanks. So sort of we're moving towards the end. I want to get an idea from both of you. I'm not sure if Common Core is still alive in Massachusetts. It's certainly alive and well in California, and on life support from the Gates Foundation Constant Infusion. And the SBAC test is alive and well in California. Where do we see that? And as someone who looks at those tests as reifying racism in our schools, reinforcing patterns of segregation, reinforcing all sorts of destructive narratives about public education. It distresses me to see our education system and our unions continuing to give credence to Common Core, to continue to give credence to SBAC. So is there a way that we can move beyond these destructive tests? I know we've made some progress in terms of moving away from the punitive aspects of NCLB, but those test scores are still being used to beat up schools in Oakland and beat up schools all over the state, and reinforce patterns of segregation, reinforce narratives of racist narratives of the achievement gap. And I think we need to move beyond them. Is there a way that your organizations can help us in moving beyond these destructive tests?
Where's Monty? We're struggling with that. I mean, MTA has come out opposed testing. We are, trying to move legislation calling for a 3-year moratorium on the high-stakes use of testing. We know that parents and students and educators are profoundly opposed to the high-stakes use. I mean, the polling is clear. Nobody wants this, and nobody likes it. And quite honestly, we've had trouble organizing the kind of mass opt-out, which is, I think, what we're going to need, that they've been able to achieve in New York. The reason I look at Monty, I mean, MTA's been sponsoring monthly meetings at our headquarters, inviting parents and community members to come together with educators and sort of figure out, what do we need to do? And I think the thing that's hard is that the answer is always the same answer, which is we have to go back to our communities. We haven't built the relationships that we need to build and communicated across differences enough. I don't think we've done a good enough job articulating, as you just really articulated so clearly, Anthony, the white supremacy and the racism that is embedded in these tests. And we have to find the places where people can start to push back and do the work. We're dealing with, and I'd be interested for the educators in the audience, the level of fear that my members experience day to day in the work site is absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, these are professionals who've been doing excellent work as educators for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, and they are afraid to say that what you're telling me to do is hurting my students. And when they talk about that, they're ashamed of themselves. And there's a very troubled sort of relationship between their shame for perpetuating what they understand to be abuse and their fear of speaking out. And my job that I am, trying to help them develop is to how to know that when they act together, they don't have to be afraid. And so I think about this a lot in terms of scaffolding language, asking people to opt out. It's no, that's like asking a kid to, read a text that she wasn't ready to read. You got to go back and find out, what is she actually reading? And how can we talk about that book? So we have to scaffold, I think, all the way back, and it's the work we have to do as unionists anyway, to have people begin to take power in the workplace in smaller ways, experience their collective action around the bullying principle. Give a shout out to Deb Young in the back there, ESP from Worcester, who organized the teachers in her school to get rid of a principal who was being a bully. That's the kind of work that we have to start to do, and then hope that we can bring in the high-stakes testing, but honestly, it's been very frustrating, and while that's going down, boom, they're going to come at us with personalized learning, and I'm still trying to figure out how to organize around that. Yes, who said that? Can I pick up on what you just said? Yeah. I think what you said is to use the bargaining as a way to do that. Yeah. And we just had, you know, Massachusetts is a conservative place, even though you all think it's a progressive place. It's that Yankee stuff. We just had a really successful contract where the teachers in Brookline bargained to say that if you're going to give us any more work based on a mandate, you have to take work away. And we'll decide, and we're going to meet and talk about that. So I agree, like, we have to start to bring things into the contract. We have to start bargaining beyond the permissible items, and we're working on that. But I'm just being honest, it's a bit of a struggle to get people there.
So, you know, I have to talk about this kind of in two levels because we're such a big system, and it's such a diverse system. We're also actually have some very conservative parts of the state, which are as red as anywhere in Louisiana or in the Deep South. And we're just lucky that most of our votes are in the 9 Bay Area counties and the Los Angeles Basin. So that actually is why we are, and the reason that we've become such a progressive state. Because remember, we're the state that gave you Richard Nixon and Proposition 13 tax reform and Ronald Reagan, and so we were a red state for many years, and it's the changing demographics and which is happening everywhere, I think, also that has changed, and you know, the browning of California that has really changed our politics. That being said, so I want to talk a little bit about at the statewide level. What we've been doing is trying to put policies and structures in place that move away from the reliance on testing. So we've developed a dashboard that actually looks at you know, we talk a lot about multiple measures, but multiple measures that some of them are still being developed. For example, when you look at school climate, so look at things like, do students have access to a counselor? Do they have access to a librarian? Is the library open? Are they safe going to and from school? If they're not being suspended, so the suspension and expulsion numbers, then are they just being thrown back in the classroom, or are the schools using restorative justice practices or some other kind of PBIS or some other kind of program like that? Those are the kinds of things that at the state level are making a difference. Now, one of the things I think the next step is when you look at things like the SBAC test, and the governor who has been very good to us, and even though he has kind of a blind spot around charters, but you know, asked why are we even participating in SBAC at all? Well, that's my question too, and frankly, you look at what the SBAC can tell you or not, and if your goal is to improve education for every student and to improve my teaching practice and to improve learning for students, the SBAC doesn't do that. And we know it's bad. It's a bad marker. It doesn't give you any kind of reliable information because the sampling is too small, and it's just a waste of money, and it hurts students. And like you said, it hurts the system as well. But so the first step we need to do is get away from testing every child every year. It is unnecessary, it's a waste of money, and it's simply immoral as far as I'm concerned. We can find the same system level information if that's what they really need, doing sampling testing in 3rd grade, 8th grade, and 11th grade, and that's just it. And we can save a hell of a lot of money doing it and spend it on things that really make a difference in students, right? So that's one of the things I think that's the next step that we're pushing for around that. And I think it's a mere realistic goal. I think most of our members are so. But what's happening at the local level is somewhat entirely different, and Oakland is a good example of that. We have 1,100 school districts in California, and even though we have for the second year given them complete control over how that money is spent, the money basically comes to the district in one line item. That means essentially it is all bargainable. all of it. And no matter how much it is, even though we haven't expanded the scope of bargaining, the fact is that through the LCAP process, the local control accountability plans, the teachers and working together with the community can influence program, number of jobs, what they're going to use to in terms of curriculum, all those things. But that requires then the union, the local union, and the community to step up and empower themselves to take hold of that process. And that we find has been a very difficult process. We're a very traumatized system. I think that's true of public education everywhere. And when you've been traumatized and beat around the head for so long, 15 years of being beat up on the front of the LA Times, which actually published everybody's VAM scores and ranked every teacher in Los Angeles by their VAM score in the newspaper, in the Los Angeles Times, causing one teacher to actually commit suicide because of that. That it's a traumatized system, so we need to help each other through building our relationships and through teaching, and the union can take a really strong step in helping them at the local level to empower themselves to take control of this LCAP process, and where we have these little demagogue administrators which don't know anything, and I truly believe you take test scores away from administrators is like taking crack away from an addict, because they act sometimes just about like that. But there has to be something to step in the volume, and you have to learn how to have good conversations like that. You have to learn strong, powerful collaboration, which means a parity of power between the union and the community and the things, all talking together and having real conversations. And we're still learning how to do that. And so that plays differently in Los Angeles than it does in Weed, California, or in the Central Bay in Modesto or Fresno. It plays differently, but it's about local teachers taking control of the money for the students that they actually know their names. And that can be a very powerful tool for us moving the system forward.
And I would just add, one of the things you have to do is democratize the unions as well. And so, like, I totally agree with the sister in the back who said, like, we have to, using bargaining as a way to push these larger issues is absolutely essential. But you need a democratic union at the local level where the rank and files really understanding that their issues matter, and they are the ones who are going to go to the table and fight, and then you can bring the community in to do that as well. And unfortunately, for too large a percentage of our locals, the members themselves are alienated from the union. And boy, that's going to come up and smack us next year when Janus has decided and our public sector unions are under attack. So, we're working in Massachusetts right now to really build capacity. We're doing a 124 plan, 1 member, 20 contacts, 4 conversations, with the idea that in those conversations you figure out what are the issues that are going on, what are the issues you share, how do you understand what those issues are, and how do you want to organize the fight to change that. It's the organize to fight that's the key piece in terms of the power.
All right. So that's our marching orders. Organize and fight, because when we fight,
we win.
All right. Thank you, Eric Heins. Thank you, Barbara Mandeloni. I will see you all.